Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome to the Hoon, where co-host Peter Bale and I go around the week's news in geopolitics and Aotearoa's political economy with a whole bunch of experts, academics and politicians, all to understand our worlds better and have some fun. Tēnā koutou katoa. And welcome in to The Hoon on the Kaka. It is Thursday, November the 6th. I'm Bernard Hickey with co-host Peter Bale. Peter, great to see you.
And Bernard, you're in Wellington, I believe. Is that right? You've gone to visit your vast real estate portfolio down there, is that right?
My vast family.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the main
You're a very
reason.
tall family. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. No, I'm very, very happy to briefly and rarely be in Wellington. And yes, it's been an interesting exercise. The city is struggling, but it's still going.
Do you mean you've taken the taxi, taken a bus from the airport, and you're giving us your assessment of Wellington based on that? Which is, I know we've discussed this many times before. You and I can drive through a city and then write 1,000 words about how brilliant fucked it is, or whatever it is we want to say. Yeah,
I've lived here for 10 years at some points, and
your glamorous assistant says she's I'm dead to her now as well.
Yes,
by the way.
that's right. Yeah,
she just missed. Yeah,
yeah. So yeah, no, I lived here for 10 years and been here for a day or two, talking to lots of people, old mates, various people, and it's struggling. It's the town that John Key said was dying. You could argue the current government is doing its bit to ensure that is true.
You could.
And we know that unemployment's up 50% since the election, and we know that 1,700 Wellingtonians have left the city to live overseas, and that its brutal housing costs have led to an exodus of people, along with a whole bunch of
jobs. But is Andrew Little then going to destroy what's left of it by putting bicycles onto the Golden Mile when I want to be able to park my 1990 Falcon and go into Kirkcaldy and Staines? Oh, hang on a minute.
No, that's not there either. Exactly. It's been a long time since Wellington actually had some reasonable car parks on Lambton Quay, which is a good thing because it means you can walk and take the bus, and it's lovely. And sadly,
but isn't the Golden Mile just being destroyed by a bunch of left-wing nonsense about cycle paths? And but my main thing is that when you see the pictures of the vegetation and the people sitting, they don't realize there's a force 10 gale blowing up and down at 90% of the time.
Yes, they've chained their ankles to the seats. No, it's you've been watching too much Facebook again. It's eventually the thing will be renovated, so to speak. But you're right. It has been a contest between the Yimbys and the NIMBYs, between a sort of an urbanist public transport dream and the people who live in the suburbs and come into town once or twice a week to go to the dentist or whatever, and who think that they should be able to park 3 meters away.
The dentists are all on the terrace, I think. But I've just had a brilliant idea, because Artie Farty is suggesting that I'm shit stirring you. But I just see friends of mine like Barry Saunders, for example, who's a well-known New Zealand PR person and so on, and Wellingtonian, and a little bit further to the right than me, is usually saying that Wellington is being turned into a kind of lefty desert of cycle lanes and everything. So, and then I saw rather impressively that Andrew Little was getting rid of the sort of temporary kindergarten fences to prevent pissed people falling into the harbour. I mean, just opening up that harbour has been such a brilliant thing. But can I just suggest that we bring back supercars racing around Wellington Harbour? Not every day. I mean, I would do it every day, but just once a year, have them race around again on the cycle paths and everything, and then everybody will be happy. We can use the cycle paths the rest of the time.
They
and
could
watch.
accidentally drive into the drink.
Well, they could,
Yep.
but it'd be spectacular. It was spectacular having those
Mm.
supercars running up and down. That doesn't seem to be quite what we want to do at the moment. Is that right?
No, no, it's a tough place, and unfortunately, it doesn't understand that it needs to be nice to its young people if it wants them to stay, and that's the problem with.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a sort of a basic. If you are in business or in government and you're trying to say to everyone, come and live in my city. It's the best place on earth. When you say that you don't like young people, you don't want them to use public transport, and you're going to make their housing brutally expensive, don't be surprised when your population falls, your economy contracts, and you can't work it out why the house prices are falling. So this is something I
Yeah,
think
well,
Wellington.
I mean, it's such a potentially. I mean, I know it has hills, but you could have bike paths with kind of Palmer things to pull you up the hills from Island Bay. I thought the Island Bay bicycle path, which does that rather tricky and clever thing, I think, of using cars as the barrier to protect you from other cars, is quite good. It's not completely mad to zoom in from Island Bay to central Wellington
Yeah,
on
no,
a bicycle.
I think the more bike paths, the better, and the better, safer bike paths we can have, the better, and the less car parks and cars we have, the better. But
Yeah,
that,
yeah. So I don't know. I mean, just so can we make so we bring the supercars back? Do we have GP sale there as well, or just whale watching?
the sailing's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would be. It's a great natural amphitheatre there, and it's no shortage of wind. So it's a great. That's a great idea. And instead of the cars, I'd say
Oh no, we do both. In fact, we could do both the same weekend actually,
at the
and
same
then I
time.
would be completely satisfied. And Bernard, I've done a little bit of a Bernard Hickey today because it's my first day of a proper swim in
Oh yeah.
in the Waitemata this summer, this beginning of summer, and I felt guilty getting in. It was a little bit crisp, uh, because I felt that I should have been one of those old ladies that swims up and down in a wetsuit all year. But blimey, it was good. I can just see why you do it, and I admire you immensely.
Yeah, no, it's starting to warm up. It's amazing when summer comes. It's fantastic. Things are warming up generally, actually, and
Oh, are you trying to do a segue?
I'm
Oh,
trying
can I
hard.
just also say, because we're gonna talk today. Well, so we're gonna do some things today. We're gonna talk to Robert Patman about Mamdani and what that means. We're going to talk to Catherine Dyer about the climate. But somebody in the feed has just said, "Love your Muslim T-shirt, Peter."
Oh, I love it. The
And I
shirt.
just
I don't
and
care if
I
it's
just
Muslim or
thought,
not. It's a beautiful shirt.
camels are just camels. They're not just, and this is not a dromedary, I believe. I think dromedaries have two humps, don't they? I mean, one hump or two. So, I mean, it's a
It's a
summer
nice
shirt
shirt.
from it's a summer
Yeah,
shirt that I got in Europe this year, and I quite like the camels. I'm very
embrace it.
keen on camels, and it's
Embrace it.
also got nothing to do with the Janjaweed in Sudan, which is one of the stories that we're going to be talking about with Robert Patman. Nice segue there.
That's
But
a
we're going to do
preview of a segue.
we're going
Yeah.
to do Catherine with Dr. Catherine Dyer shortly with climate. We're going to talk to Robert about he thinks he can segue Mamdani into our world. We're going to talk a little bit about Christians in Nigeria, and I do think we should talk about Sudan just because it is so hard to report. So we're going to do that as well. And then you've got some really interesting people to talk about homeless people in Auckland and various other places, and whether we need bulldozers going up and down Queen Street getting rid of them.
No, we don't.
No,
Definitely
I
do
know.
not need that. And we will be talking to Helen Robinson from the Auckland City Mission. They do wonderful work. And there's been big news this week in the world of homelessness in Auckland that tells us a lot about our politics, our problems with housing, and what's being done about it. It's going to be a cracking show. And
Good.
I'm really interested to hear more about the climate issues because that's been one of the hot topics in the last couple of days. Late on Tuesday night, into my email box pops a little announcement from the Climate Change Minister, Simon Watts, and an even more obscure and difficult to find set of details from the Ministry for the Environment, announcing changes to the emissions trading scheme and proposed changes to effectively the Zero Carbon Act. Catherine, what did you make of these big announcements this week?
Let me break this up into two things. First,
Yeah,
I'll give you a quick summary of the top things the main things that they actually changed, and then I'll try to give you my opinion without too many expletives in
good.
it. So they proposed changes to the Climate Change Response Act, some of which they intend to pass under urgency this year. So it's split into two separate bills. The main things are that they intend to remove the requirement to align the emissions trading scheme and its budgets with our NDCs, or our commitments to the Paris Agreement, our international commitments to the Paris Agreement. And they also intend to reduce the role of the Climate Change Commission in providing advice on emissions reduction plans, and reduce their role in consulting with the public. There were a few other things in there as well around changing the timings of decisions and advice over the time frame when they're making plans and budgets. And they're also planning to put off the date of carbon when they have to achieve a carbon neutral government from 2025 to 2050. And then later on, they're also looking at making some changes to the Climate Change Response Act and to its to the purpose of the Act. So if I just so overall, I would say this is a dismantling of a lot of the work that has been done over the last probably as long as a decade in building up a climate change response system. The first thing that has happened in terms of the emissions trading scheme is they have crashed the price of carbon on the scheme, and that is a direct reflection of people that operate on that scheme saying, well, now we don't trust what the government is going to do in the future. You have signalled that you're going to use the emissions trading scheme to respond to short-term political and economic considerations, and you're not going to use it to try to achieve long-term emissions reduction plans. And so that immediately, means that people are not going to respond to pricing in the same way on the market. That we know from past experience that when you tank that the price of the carbon market, that takes a really long time to repair the damage that's done from that. That damage is now done, and any attempt to repair it will take years of hard work. So that's problematic right then, and not least because this government has said that the emissions trading scheme is going to be their number one main tool for doing anything about reducing emissions. So they've cancelled just about every other piece of policy that we had in place. They said we're going to rely fully on this one scheme, and now they've tanked it. So thanks very much for that, guys. Reducing the role of Climate Change Commission and providing advice on emissions reduction plans. Basically, what they are looking to do is get less advice that contradicts with what they actually want to do, and that highlights the fact that they are not achieving our emissions reduction budgets, and that they're not putting in place the kind of policies that we should be putting in place in order to achieve our long-term plans. So they want to hear less from the Climate Change Commission, because the Commission is a bunch of experts who aren't saying what they want to hear.
I think we've heard enough of experts. I think the people of this country have said they've heard enough of experts, haven't they? As Michael Gove famously said about Brexit. Sorry, not breakfast.
It's not like they won't. They will find their own pet experts to say what they want to say and give them very narrow terms of reference so that they don't say anything by mistake that the government doesn't want to hear. So we've already seen that kind of action in progress. And we know from surveys that we've done with the public wants to have governments in place that are taking climate change seriously and are taking meaningful action. And they also want that action to be clear and transparent and to know what's going on. And so one of the first things that this government has done is try to obscure and make less transparent what they're actually doing. They're not admitting to the fact that they clearly intend not to meet our Paris Agreement targets by not purchasing international offsets. And so they're basically a climate denying government who dresses it up with pretty language and pretends that they're not doing the thing that they're doing and hopes that we won't notice for long enough.
Yeah. So who else is asking this? Because Catherine, this was exactly why I sent you that little message ahead, which I know is cheeky, just about sort of being strong on this. It was just about, because we talk about these things and we kind of brush our hair and move on. And then somebody on the feed is just saying thank you so much for the powerful clarity of this. We definitely need to have this chat what's on. But I looked up those Luxon comments about essentially only an idiot would deny climate change, blah blah blah. And we're going to talk to Robert about this as well, because if you can go back on the Paris treaty, you can go back on almost anything. And I can't quite work out how to do it right now, but I think we're going back on the Treaty of Waitangi and the Paris Agreement at the same time in a way that makes these guys look like a bunch of lying thumbs. I think I told Bernard
which
the
is
other day.
why they are not honest and upfront about what it is they're doing, which is why they try to obscure it behind.
Yeah, but who's holding them? I don't see this being reported very well either. And I noticed also, Catherine, the weirdly, for some reason, I wanted to go back and watch a little bit of Parliament the other day because I noticed that Shane Jones was lashing out at Chloe Swarbrick about this comment about mythical emissions. Which was the decision about not tracking, opting not to track certain corporate emissions. And Christopher Luxon's response to that was not the response of someone who says, you'd be a nutter to not believe in climate change. This is really, I love the way you put it. This is going back on everything that they've stood for and everything he's stood for until now.
Yeah, it's
Isn't
almost
it?
like
Is it not? Sorry, let me dress up my assertion as a question again. Yeah.
Yep.
I think when we really look at the language that's been used here, there is a lot of doublespeak going on. There's a lot of we're saying we mean this and we're going to do this, and then doing the exact opposite, and hoping we somehow won't notice. The other thing that's really frustrating about this is that the Climate Change Response Act was the result of a lot of hard work to get bipartisan agreement on what we were going to do going forward. And before that, we had the situation where we had this constant back and forth and flip-flopping between taking climate change seriously and not taking it seriously. And what it needed more than anything, even if we couldn't get all of the things that we really needed to be doing in place, what we at least needed was some kind of agreed baseline about what we were going to do and about how we were going to move forward. And they have just destroyed all of that. So that act was bipartisan. It was passed by both Labour and National. It took a lot of hard work. It didn't achieve everything that I would have liked it to have achieved. But it at least got that bipartisan agreement that said we won't be flip-flopping all the time in the future.
Yeah.
That is over now. That is over. Now we will be flip-flopping our way all the way forward into the future because, and my question straight away for the Labour leaders is, I want to know that they're going to put all of this back in place as soon as they come back into power.
Which will be quite difficult.
And I'm also looking at it going, don't even worry about talking to these guys to get bipartisan agreement, because the only reason they turn up to those meetings is to water down the policy that gets put in place so that they can then overtip it the next time they're in power. So, but what that means, if we take that approach, is that we will be flip-flopping all the way into the future.
Yeah.
And that means we can never achieve the things that we want to achieve. And everything costs us 5 times more than it would have otherwise. So this is a very, very costly exercise for all of us who are taxpayers, all of us in the country that will be, suffering the consequences of this. Yeah, costly
thank you so
exercise.
much. Let me just ask you a sort of rationalist's question on this, because of course I'm the most rational person always on this podcast. Sort of Bernard's kind of wishy-washy, socialist ideas. The implications the implications for the ETS. There isn't sort of the point of the market reaction from the ETS today. The sort of thing that a national government that supposedly supports business and economic signals should really say WTF. I mean, I noticed today when I was writing my script for today, in the vague way that people think we have a script, which is vague, WTF kept coming up as much as ETS did. Is that not it's a denial of the market signal that they've been sent this week?
I think that's a really important point here that we ought to be paying attention to, is that I don't think that this government is in favour of all market and all business. I think they have favourite industries that they support and who lobby to them and whose needs they respond to. And I don't think that applies across all of the business community. I think a lot of particularly small business and a lot of the businesses that are active in the ETS are getting sunk by this. I don't think they care about them.
Someone just said that
so I
they
don't
really
think it's
appreciate
quite
you.
as much of a.
Someone just said that they really appreciate you swearing, which I thought was probably the C word, which I thought was carbon. But do go ahead, Bernard. I'm sorry, I'll shut up now.
No, I think Catherine's exactly right about the market impacts of this. And if this was a business-friendly government that cared about creating a set of rules and expectations for businesses to do long-term planning, then they wouldn't be messing around with the Zero Carbon Act and the bipartisan consensus built up over a decade to do it. And the best exposition of that came in yesterday's financial stability report, which showed that the reinsurance costs for New Zealand's businesses, households, have risen by 4 times to nearly 1% of GDP over the last 15 years. That's a combination of quake risk, to be fair, which is not much to do with the climate, but of course the extra costs of climate events, which it seems every week now we are having multi-tens of millions of dollars of costs coming because of climate events. There are still hundreds of people in the South Island off their power. It's now clear that a good chunk of the pivots, the irrigation pivots for all these dairy farms that have been converted in the last 20 years were wrecked in the windstorms.
I mean, I saw you mentioned that, but now I've realised what the implications are, Bernard. So interesting.
Yep. And every business in the country will now see over time an increase in their insurance costs, apart from anything. And the commitments to the climate, not just to the people of New Zealand through this Zero Carbon Act, but also our trading partners, the European Union and the UK, those commitments are now in serious doubt. And it's a matter of time before some farmers and trade diplomats in Europe and the UK notice and start saying, even if they themselves are not serious about climate change, they'll definitely use it as a weapon to punish us. And this is a party and a government which is supposed to be in favour of business and in favour of farmers. And they've just done something to gut a bipartisan piece of legislation that will reduce certainty for businesses and farmers for decades to come, and increase costs.
And so we normally have the soliloquy at the end, but let me just interject one, and then isn't this also and I think Bernard should write a lot more about this over the next day or so, except that I know he needs to lie down on Friday. But this is what goes to that point about Winston Peters and various others saying New Zealand only accounts for 0.1% of any global warming, and anything we do is irrelevant. It's how we stand up in our treaties, in our obligations, and in our commitments. And as you say, if we have a bipartisan commitment. So maybe address that too, please, Catherine. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so there's 2 things I'd say about that. One is around transition costs over time. We know there's all sorts of research around that shows that your transition costs, we know that we have to move to a zero carbon economy at some point in time. Otherwise, things keep warming. So we have to get to zero carbon at some point. The transition costs are a lot lower if you do them over, say, 20 years or 30 years, rather than trying to rush them through in the last 10 years. And so the more time that we spend in not doing things now, the more expensive it gets in the future. So that is not economically sound decision making. It's only economically sound if you are only worried about your profits this year and next year and not, 15 years down the line. So that doesn't make that is not effective or efficient policy making. The other thing I would say is I have really seen a government that needs more to get expert advice and to consult with experts and with the public before they make decisions, before they tank things.
It's
Because
common
that's-
sense. It's
this
just
is
common
not
sense, Catherine.
Yeah, this is not the first time they've tanked something this badly. And
What was the other one?
and they are-
Sorry, when you say they've tanked, what else have they tanked in this way?
In my mind, I was referring to the ferry decision. But
Oh, yes, I see.
I think that's yet to come out fully.
Yeah.
But yeah, and yet they are deciding yet again to pass this under urgency, to not do any of the consultation that they clearly, so very clearly need to be doing. And that is just, it's again, it's that very short-termist thing. I want what I want, and I'm just going to push it to the roo no matter what anybody thinks.
Thanks, Catherine. I've just suggested to our lovely producer Simon, who's just negotiating all of this and to our detailed script. Robert, we were bringing you in partly. We wanted to bring it because Catherine's just done an absolutely superb sort of set of soliloquies about various government decisions, particularly in the ETS. In the energy trading environment, ETS, energy trading system, about resiling from its earlier decisions, and that just reminded me, and it is a good segue for your view that we pull away from international agreements at our own risk.
Absolutely, and also we can demonstrate some leadership within those international agreements as well. I don't think it's in the interests of a relatively small country to be following the lead of countries such as the United States when the interests between the two countries diverge so dramatically. The United States, of course, will be ultimately have to respond to climate change. It can remain in climate denial, but of course, science will catch up with it. But we can make provision for what is a looming threat and try to deal with it in the best possible way. And we should also be, and I'm sure Catherine probably covered this, we should be working closely with small and middle powers who are anxious to address this problem. And it seems to me that we do nothing by pretending it's not going to occur. I mean, that's just performative short-term nonsense. And it may win a few brownie points in one or two coalition partners, but it's actually endangering the long-term risks of this, the long-term interests of this country.
Thank you so much for that. And of course, just so that Simon can fix this up when I messed it up earlier, of course, it's the emission trading system. So I do apologise for that. Catherine, thank you so much. That was punchy and professional, and people are describing you and Robert as a national treasure. Or a pair of national treasures.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Catherine. Lovely to have you on the show.
Guys.
Thanks.
Robert, when I dropped you a note today just about what we're going to discuss, you wanted to talk a little bit about the election of Zoran Mamdani in New York. I mean, that's not usually an international affairs conversation. So why are we talking about Zoran Mamdani?
Because it has...
I do know how to pronounce his name properly.
Zoran I think Mamdani's election has considerable national and international implications.
Yeah.
I think the national implications are quite self-evident within the United States. And of course, Mamdani wasn't alone. The Democrats also did very well in New Jersey and Virginia. But I think what is significant internationally, Bernard, Peter, and all of us we've been talking about how do liberal democracies deal with an extremely right-wing populist government like Mr. Trump, who basically makes it up as he goes along in many respects. And I think it's been a source of befuddlement for many liberal democracies. What we've seen is that despite the best efforts of Mr. Trump's personal intervention, plus the support of about 10 billionaires, more than 22 million was funneled towards Cuomo in the latter stages of this campaign. Despite all that, and despite, quite frankly, ludicrous allegations against Zoran Mamdani, he's prevailed and he's won emphatically. Now, what does that mean? Well, Mamdani has been a source of enormous irritation towards Trump because he has presented a position where he takes on Trump in a very direct way. He doesn't pull his punches and he doesn't fawn over him. And when Mr. Trump is loose with the truth, he calls him out. Now, you may say, oh, well, this is what's this got to do with international affairs? I believe that as Mr. Trump's position is shown to be more vulnerable domestically than many people assumed. I've been reading the editorials of the Washington Post. There was almost a smug assumption that with a bit of backing from the billionaires, that Mamdani would be taken care of and go away. After all, he was anathema to the American system, as one Washington Post editorial put it. That's not happening, and it's not happening because he's actually seeking to address, if you like, the concerns of many ordinary people in New York. Now, whether he succeeds in delivering is another matter. But I think this is important because New York is the financial capital of the world, arguably, and it does have international significance. It may mean that other liberal democracies who've been pulling their punches on a range of issues may decide, as domestic opposition to Trump mounts, that actually, do they really need to humiliate themselves and actually not defend our own interests? And I just think we shouldn't read too much into it, but what is happening is of international significance. And Mamdani himself was, part of his campaign was international in nature. It was about New York, but it was also about American policy towards Gaza.
And he didn't.
And he's won the support of a large number of Jewish people in New York, including rabbis. So this is very interesting because it's sort of really it's rejecting the conventional wisdom amongst the Democratic leadership, and I think the conventional wisdom amongst our leadership in this country and many other liberal democracies, that the way to deal with Trump is to try and butter him up, compromise where you can, and hope for the best. And as we've seen in New Zealand, the results haven't been that impressive with a 15% tariff against us. So in a sense, I just think this may lead to a bit of a rethink internationally.
Interesting.
That's
and
I think may actually give more autonomy. Sorry.
No, forgive me.
Just final point. It may give more autonomy to middle powers and liberal democracies in actually defending their interests, particularly on free trade. There's so many countries like our own that have a really deep national interest in a free trade system. They've been remarkably quiet as Mr. Trump has effectively gone a long way to try to dismantle it with his imposition of tariffs.
Bernard.
Yeah, I think you're right, Robert, in that it is clear that those who stand up to Trump and call out his false views are the ones who actually achieve things and not only eventually win his attention and his respect and avoid the worst consequences, but don't diminish their own views and their own standing in the minds of their own people. The best example of that, of course, is what's happened in China, where Xi Jinping has just quietly and firmly pushed back very hard at the United States. And, it's no surprise that the good chunk of the rest of the world are looking at China and going, they are the ones who are seem to have a plan. They seem to be able to stand up for themselves, have a strategy, and it's no mistake that Trump's failed to push through with his big increases in tariffs. And China, although it is obviously going ahead with its own decoupling and away from the United States, is able to push back.
Yeah. And I think Canada also to a lesser degree. I mean, obviously Canada's not a superpower, but it has been directly threatened by the Trump administration.
Yeah, our Canadian listeners just have all gone now. Thank you very much.
No, I still think Mark Carney does present a bit of a template for liberal democracies dealing with Trump. And what is clear is that the fawning diplomacy has not really delivered the results that many had hoped.
Yeah.
And many had hoped, Mark Rutte is an exponent of this, that by sort of charming the guy and flattering him, and he loves all that, let's be quite clear, it would actually have substantive results. And I'm not sure that has so far been the case. Yeah. The Europeans were convinced they had moved Trump prior to the Alaska meeting with Putin.
Yeah.
And of course, he did eventually cancel a meeting in Budapest with Putin. And once again, the Europeans thought that they made substantial progress in that direction. I think, as I say, I think that's yet to be proven. But I think in general, what's frustrating, I think, many observers is that it's no one seeks to deliberately antagonize the President of the United States, whoever it be. And not least of all, a country like New Zealand, which depends on free trade. At the same time, however, it's quite another thing to roll over when a president is upsetting an international order, which we depend on based on rules, and also impose tariffs on one of the most open economies in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, this is... And for
Deliberately
our
open.
government to effectively surrender on those fronts is very disappointing.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? But because, of course, as some of our readers have pointed out, this week the Supreme Court will take a case that is about whether those Trump tariffs are legal at all. So that will be there may be two quite interesting setbacks potentially. I also wanted to bring up, just because it sort of presages a piece that's at some point is going to come out in the Listener from me about political discourse. Couple of the people that I quote in that story when it comes out, Brian Tamaki and a couple of other people, just immediately in New Zealand went into the implications about Mamdani winning as a communist Muslim, and how this showed us that we shouldn't have, immigration from communist countries and Muslim, of communists from Muslim, and just these things come into our discourse so quickly. And so disgracefully, or sort of, I apologize. They come in a really weird kind of insertion of these rather foreign ideas into our discourse. Have we turned him back on again, Bernard? We turned you off for a second because you had a slight echo. Go ahead, Robert.
I basically, Brian Tamaki is repeating the Trump line. Yeah, a communist. And of course, Mr. Tamaki is a great supporter of Netanyahu as well. So what is interesting is why a New Zealand public figure like this would feel so devoted.
Exactly.
In that way.
Yeah.
It's one thing, I mean, of course, Mr. Tamaki is perfectly entitled to his views, and that's fair enough. But you do expect those views to be based on accurate information. And in European terms, by the way, Mamdani, like Bernie Sanders, would probably be a social democrat.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, calling himself a socialist is just stretching it a bit, but that's another story.
Yeah. We talked also, Robert, and I was surprised that you felt you could find an angle on this, but I'm incredibly interested in the story for all sorts of reasons. Sudan. There's a couple of things one can say about that, is that we are seeing arguably a genocide. We're seeing a gigantic civil war. It's extremely difficult and dangerous to report, as we've discussed various times over the last 3 years. The UAE is deeply enmeshed in it. Saudi Arabia is deeply enmeshed in it. Russia is deeply enmeshed in it. Yeah. But we don't have yet George Clooney doing what he did in the Darfur period. What's going on there? What's the relevance to New Zealand? And then when we segue you out of this, I also want you to touch on the threat to invade Nigeria, or at least attack Nigeria to protect Christians. But to start on Sudan, please.
Well, Sudan, the civil war, for our viewers and listeners, began in April 2023. And putting it quite simply, it occurred in the arrangements for a democratic transition. The RSF group objected to being integrated into the Sudanese army. And so we have a confrontation between two strong figures, one representing the RSF and one representing the Sudanese army. What has unfolded, and there are parallels here with Gaza. In both conflicts, brutal conflicts in which the laws of war are ignored and international war crimes are committed, the UN Security Council has been impotent and bypassed. And the reason is, of course, there are players on the UN Security Council who have a deep stake in what's going on in Gaza, in the Sudan. And so, as in Gaza, the UN Security Council was not able to formally fulfill its role of upholding peace and security. Why didn't the United States? You didn't hear Mr. Trump on the campaign trail say he was going to bring the carnage to an end. The administration has woken
it's the
up in the
10th
last
war that
10
he
days.
hasn't stopped yet. But yeah.
Yeah. The reason, I think, is because the United States' closeness to the UAE, which is a big supporter of the RSF. And the RSF, of course, have been subject to the Sudanese government has attempted to go to the International Criminal Court over the RSF, I believe. So the situation is that once again we have a lack of leadership globally, and we have key players in the Security Council either looking the other way or actively participating in the conflict there. And I suppose, the Trump administration is welcome that it has actually said it's going to try to, in September of this year, it said that it wanted to bring the conflict to an end. It certainly has the leverage. It could, for example, lean heavily on the UAE. But of course, the UAE was on the same side as the United States and Saudi Arabia in the Yemeni civil war, in which those parties were fighting the Houthi rebels. So
yeah, and I hadn't realised until recently, Robert, that apparently some of the members of the RSF went over to help.
Yes, and that's probably where the UAE. What's in it for the UAE? Well, the UAE is trying to transition away from its oil-dependent economy.
Gold.
Sudan, has impressive minerals. You just mentioned one of them. So it's a country in chaos, but has potential wealth going forward. And the UAE probably wants to establish a bit of a presence there.
Right.
And it's got a base in Somalia, which it's been using to funnel arms there. Been buying Chinese drones, apparently, according to US intelligence.
Yeah. Robert, shall we leave Nigeria till next week, Bernard, as it were?
Thank you very much.
And maybe an attack on that before. Robert, thank you so much. I think
welcome.
your segue in bringing Sudan in is so important and really interesting. And it is not, in my opinion, the media's fault that we're not knowing more about Sudan. But please go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard.
Thank you.
Bernard.
It's time now to welcome in Helen Robinson, the Auckland City Missioner, to the Hoon. Helen's been on a mini Hoon before, but it's really great that she's able to join us to talk about not just a big issue that's blown up this week, because it's a huge underlying issue that's there every week and every day, but it became clear this week that the government seems to be keen on a particular tactic or even a legislative change which could really hurt a lot of people, to be frank. Helen, could you tell us a bit more about how this has come up this week?
Kia ora koroa, thank you. It's lovely to be here. We started to hear rumours, and they literally were that late last week, to say that the government was considering move on legislation. So it's a code word for literally processes or enforcement that means that they can move people on, particularly in relation to rough sleeping. Although I have to acknowledge, in some of the conversation that's occurred since, is this about antisocial behaviour or rough sleeping, knowing that those two are certainly at a level of perception often the same thing, although in reality often not. The digging and actually Google search led her to understand, I think it's Ryan Hamilton's private bill in the biscuit tin, and very genuinely I didn't even know it was in the biscuit tin, let alone was being considered. And then
turns out Chris Bishop also didn't really know about it.
And interestingly, it's really only through the media, myself, and I had one of your colleagues tell me that the Prime Minister confirmed that it actually this morning was being considered, had not yet gone to Cabinet, but perhaps might go to Cabinet in the next couple of weeks. and what we do understand that lots of the concern is centred around central city Auckland, particularly, and the reality of what's going on there in terms of rough sleeping, and particularly, I think the reality for business people, and actually what that means for them in trying to do their day-to-day business. One of the things that we've been trying to communicate actually is that yes, this is a central city Auckland problem, but it's an Auckland problem, it's a New Zealand problem, set against the context of the census data showing that just under 113,000 are severely housing deprived. And particularly, and this is what you and I have talked about, Berna, before, that the shift in emergency housing policies in September of last year, very, very simply, the eligibility criteria was made a lot harder. So since September of last year, all we have seen is more rough sleepers. So it feels very consequential, really, change of policy, more rough sleepers. The council data here in Auckland released a couple of months ago, it was a couple of months ago, showed that there is a known 800 rough sleepers across Auckland. We believe that it's probably closer to 1,000 in what we know known. Our experience teaches us that what you know is only part of the game, though, very honestly, because the nature of rough sleeping means that it really is often hidden and really the tip of the iceberg of homelessness here in New Zealand. So what we have been trying to communicate to anyone who'd listen, to be honest, very clearly, is that any enforcement process or punishment process, or specifically here moving on, if we can just put the moral argument to the side, which I will come back to and is important, but very specifically, it's just ineffective. Where do people move on to? And what happens when they're moved on? And then certainly the international evidence overseas, and then more broadly just enforcement, is that the nature of rough sleeping is that people always come back. Like there's a simplicity to actually just the lived reality of homelessness, really, and particularly rough sleeping. And that the nature of rough sleeping is that it's drawn to our city centres particularly. And then there is the moral argument that, particularly as the leader of the Auckland City Mission, I'll very clearly stand on. People who experience homelessness and rough sleeping are in the first instance people.
Yes.
Who deserve a home. And actually the answer that is shared everywhere here is that, well, we want a safe and prosperous city that suits everyone. That's the game I'm in for. And that the answer to that actually is homes. Appropriate homes, and then for people who are rough sleeping, particularly most often significant support is needed, and social and health support. So that the third arm to that is to really ramp up a health response here in our country.
May I just ask you, before Bernard asks his final questions, which is usually his method, you guys have done amazingly well with your new mission. Could you explain, and I know you probably are preaching to the converted, knowing a little bit of our audience, the principle of housing first, that the solution to just, I mean, I did a piece recently about this related to Kaingora and the government's destruction of it, but this principle that not waiting for them to sort of start putting on a suit and tie when they're sleeping in the street.
Totally, and it's literally encapsulated in those two words, which is housing first. So in the old days, there was a theory or a philosophy that people need to get ready for permanent housing. And that there was quite a moral undertone that someone who was a drug user, or which includes alcohol, perhaps may not have deserved housing. And certainly if they were housed, that the risk is that would be ineffective or certainly not sustained in their tenancy. And the housing first notion just turns all of that on its head, and now has really good evidence both here in New Zealand and overseas that just says house people, start there, get the right housing,
get them safe
affordable
and
housing.
Get them safe and secure, and then they can sort out these other complex issues. Is that right?
Totally, and it's not rocket science when you think about it. That if I was misusing alcohol, that it would be a lot harder to address that misuse if I'm outdoors. Because the very nature of being outdoors would, one, just make it difficult to access services, but two, would contribute to actually needing to some kind of substance use and actually just as a coping mechanism. So and actually indoors, when people are safe, when they're secure, that's when we as human beings are more likely to deal with those complex issues.
Helen, thank you so much for doing it, because that was, and people are responding to it. But it sometimes you have to restate those simple questions about this, because I was saying to Bernard today, and again, we often do, anecdotal things that are from our focus group of one or two, Bernard and me. I was incredibly struck today in Wynyard Quarter, kind of an increasingly posh little corner of Auckland. I came across two homeless people who were, looking for money and had signs and so on. But they were people of a sort or of a characteristic that I hadn't really seen before in the way that I had. And I thought, this is one of those, and also in a place, but there seemed to be some signals, as you would expect after the recession or after the decline of the last few years we've seen, that this is getting really quite harsh. And that also, but that people like us will be, this is when it starts to really hit, right?
And
Or be
that's exactly
perceived.
what. Yeah.
Forgive me.
Sorry, Peter, to interrupt.
No.
That's exactly it. Like, the reality of homelessness is that this is any one of us. This is me 3 or 4 life events away. I get sick. I can't pay a mortgage. I have a family dislocation or breakdown. They're not resourced or able emotionally or financially. What do I do? And I think part of the fear or the projection that actually happens around homelessness is that it's a denial actually of our common vulnerability. Here we are as human beings, any one of us, this could be.
Common vulnerability is such a lovely phrase, and I think it's one of those things that we just all forget. Bernard, you're just itching to shut me up.
I'm curious, Helen, about this Housing First program, because the government has said, here's 300 places we're going to fund, and the implication is, now we've done that, then we can get these people off the streets and get back to welcoming in the tourists and the conference goers, deliberately pointed to by the Prime Minister yesterday. He said he wanted to get Auckland sorted. But the Housing First 300 places, as I understand it, only 2 have actually been delivered. What's currently happening with Housing First and those places in Auckland?
And the 2, and of course I'm not the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, so they have the insight. What I do know about the 300 additional, knowing that there's already hundreds, if not thousands, of Housing First places across the country. The mission has over 220 places ourselves, so that are already kind of underway. But of those 300, I think 207 came to Auckland. Now that's all of Auckland, 207. And if you remember that figure that I said before, that across Auckland we know that there are at least 800 people rough sleeping, and I think it's probably more close to 1,000. And then you stand back across the country and then look at every day or across weeks. I'm talking to colleagues in Northland, Whangarei, certainly here in Auckland, Tauranga, New Plymouth, Wairarapa, Wellington, Nelson, Blenheim, Christchurch, Dunedin. All of these places are having rough sleepers, and that's 300 additional for this country, let alone central city Auckland, which is obviously where the spotlight is. So Housing First is the way to go, and I will acknowledge that 300, that's a very good thing. And it is just truly only the beginning. So this kind of spotlight really is an opportunity for someone like me to actually say, Housing First works. Please, we need 1,000 of them in Auckland today. and then let organisations like us who have the experience and can do this, and there are good organisations across Auckland doing this and across our country, and just let us get about our job, which is homes and supporting people in those homes. And actually, in a relatively short space of time, months is what I'm talking about, you will actually start to see a significant difference. We also do need an additional service, which is what we call immediate access to shelter and support. So in a housing response system, you need an ability to provide shelter immediately. So Bernard, you see me on the street, you say, Helen, do you want to come indoors? I say, yes, please. And that there is literally shelter and appropriate support within hours of that conversation occurring. And that our experience here and evidence overseas is if you have that part of the system really clear and what we call a low barrier access, so low to no barrier, then actually you're going a long way to helping people sustained in housing and not in rough sleeping. The longer you are on the street, the harder it is to get out. And again, the answers are really, really simple. People need homes. People need appropriate support and health services.
Helen, may I ask you a final question? Actually, no, Bernard's going to ask you the final question. And I'm asking this because it came up in some of the feedback Bernard had to a sort of State of the Nation piece he did last week about individual responsibility. And we keep hearing this come up. To what extent are homeless people responsible for their own dilemma, and how much do they just need to pull their socks up and get on with it? Like the rest
I
of
have
us.
never met someone who is homeless or a 5-year-old say to me, my dream is to be homeless. Which is the most simple or metaphorical way of to say not one of us want to be homeless. You are talking about the reality, particularly at rough sleeping, of the convergence of two truths. One, poverty. People simply do not have enough money to access affordable housing. So that's a kind of concrete reality that I know the two of you talk often about. Secondly, that by the time that you are rough sleeping, you are often very physically ill. So we have a medical centre here at the mission. Our average age of death is between 55 and 56. So people die of homelessness. And then associated with that is all the reality of cognitive impairment, mental illness, often a brain injury, an acquired brain injury, and then an addiction and some kind of comorbidity that's going on. So a cognitive impairment and a mental illness. So where is the individual fault in that? And therefore, where is the individual responsibility? And it links back to that reality of being vulnerable. All of us at some point need help. And actually, some of us need more help at different times or more intense, usually because of what has been done to us. And I've publicly gone on record to say if New Zealand could acknowledge and solve our violence problem, we would be going a long way to actually responding to the reality of homelessness here in New Zealand.
Helen, I'm curious about all of the people who run their businesses in the city. You know, the shopkeepers, the heart of the city, the Chamber of Commerce. All of those people who are, they're aware and they want to solve a problem and help. How much appetite or support is there amongst the business communities to provide this housing first and to, find places for people to get off the streets? Apart from anything else, there's a whole bunch of empty office space in the Auckland city.
And you may genuinely be surprised that the business community is actually often one of our biggest supporters. And a shout out to Viv and at Heart of the City, Viv Beck there, and other people. I do acknowledge that for many business owners, actually in our country, let alone Auckland City, this is really hard, and many are fighting for survival. And I think that there is a long-term built-up frustration where people are saying the reality of this homelessness, or the reality of no people in the city, or the reality of money literally not being spent in businesses, it's really hurting us. And to be fair to the Business Association, they have been saying for a long time, this homelessness thing is a problem. And you can hear my frustration really, because as I've been just so clearly trying to communicate, we changed the eligibility criteria to emergency housing, that this will occur. And nobody, I think, including business associations, want people to be without homes. So there's lots of good support actually to say, please, let's get people the help that they need. And noting that there's a wide spectrum of, or a continuum of people probably in the, that had the thought, Peter, that you were referencing before, that there is some sense of people's individual responsibilities. Every time I try to explain a specific reality of an individual and help people connect it back to the fact that it could be their daughter or
Yes.
son
Or
or brother or
themselves.
sister, exactly, that there's often a softening or an understanding. People don't choose homelessness.
Helen, thank you
Helen,
so
thank you
much.
so
That
much.
was, I'm sorry, Bernard. We're just as usual. We're not actually connected at the hip, Helen. But I mean, people are saying you're a saint, Bernard.
No,
Do you want to?
I'm really not, Peter.
would you-
That's very short of me anyway.
Would you like
Thank you
Would you
both
like to
very
close
much.
Helen out, as it were, Bernard, please?
Oh, thank you so much, Helen, for coming on, and we look forward to finding out what happens with the housing first, and we'll try to keep on top of what the government is doing or not doing here. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you both very much. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
No, thank you so much, Helen.
Bye.
Jesus, Bernard, she is really a saint. You're trying to dash somewhere, aren't you? I can see you
I'm-
getting
no-
fidgety. You've got a dinner or a speech to give in about
I'm
5 minutes.
always conscious that people have things to do. I'm really really satisfied that today we had some great guests on and we talked about some great stuff. So my soliloquy can wait if we had one. Although I had
Okay.
a bit of a crack.
Well, you did
earlier
have a
on
bit of a
climate.
crack. Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
let me
yeah.
give you two, not a skateboarding dog. So Michael Wolff, who we've had on,
Oh, yeah.
and we talked, I think last week or maybe the week before, about his response to the Melania Trump $1 billion suit against him, which is he is suing, he's countersuing her. He's now raised $500,000 in
Wow.
his GoFundMe for that. I'd encourage you to, if you go to GoFundMe, if you want to contribute to it. I did today, which I don't want you to think as me being sort of anti-Trump or anti-journalistic, but I am a friend of Michael's, so that's why I'm doing it. And also his Substack, Bernard, is the #1 in the world immediately. Apparently it's gone to #1. Is that right?
Yes. Substack can really work, and it is interesting that he's done that and
Yeah.
done so well.
Yeah.
It's thrilling to see. I'd also, just by the by, recommend people have a look at helping with the campaign that Susie Wiles is
Yes.
running to pay her legal bills after winning her case against the Auckland University. For them not supporting her during the COVID abuse, and she said there's a bill of $400,000 to pay,
Interesting.
and I was very happy to contribute, and
Really
I'm sure
do, because
others will be.
I wouldn't yet, but I did to Michael's. That's, I should think about that, because I endorse it, but I'm not sure I would actually give her dosh. But maybe I should.
She is a.
I feel
she is
that's a little bit too close to the bone, but maybe I'll think about it. Thank you.
Yeah,
Bernard. That's good.
she's a brave and thoughtful person who has sacrificed a lot personally, and for a lot of other people who are not dead now. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just doing that because I love the screen pen, but I'm also, that is my signal that I am going to do a very, very brief skateboarding dog.
Yes.
And it's a pun in a sense, because we David Solomon is the chief executive of Goldman Sachs, which many people listening to this will know as the kind of epicenter of evil in the world, in the capitalist world. Turns out David Solomon is a famous DJ as well. And the Goldman Sachs, it would appear, have urged him to DJ less because he was kind of changing the reputation of the company. But it allowed the Financial Times to run a sub-headline, because this guy's, David Solomon's DJ name is D-Sol. And so they had the sub-headline, Dark Night of D-Sol.
That's just great pleasure in sub-editing. I just love it when someone in the bowels of the FT has thought, I can see if this gets through. And it did. Brilliant.
I know. We've done it before. Yeah. All right. Thank you,
Thank you very
Bernard.
much. Thank you very much, everyone. Ka kite anō. We'll see you all
Ka
next
kite
week.
anō.
Bye-bye.
See you, Bernard. Have a lovely
Bye-bye.
time in Wellington if the tubes are still running or whatever they have there.
Great. Bye-bye.